My name is Selene Ward. I turned 71 last spring, though sometimes I feel older in the bones and younger in the mind. People say I have a patient nature, but patience is just what remains when you've spent a lifetime holding words that no one wants to hear. That Christmas, I arrived at my son Calder's new house near Forsyth Park. The streets were lined with old oaks wrapped in white lights, and the air smelled faintly of river salt and roasted pecans. Inside, everything gleamed polished wood floors, a tree trimmed in gold. Candles flickering beside untouched wine glasses. It looked like a page torn from a magazine. Perfect enough to make you forget how much pretending costs. Calder met me at the door with his practiced smile, the one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. His wife, Ivy, appeared behind him in a silver dress that glittered under the chandelier. "So glad you could make it," she said, her tones smooth as the champagne in her hand. Dinner was loud, cheerful, and hollow. They spoke about clients, investments, and the restaurant they were thinking of buying. I tried to join in, but each sentence I offered landed like a soft feather in a room full of glass. I felt like a guest performing the role of mother. When dessert plates were cleared, Calder leaned back in his chair and grinned. "All right, moment of truth," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out 3 white envelopes, edges crisp, and placed one before each of us himself. Ivy and me, a little holiday surprise. Ivy laughed too loudly. "Oh no, not again. You know how he loves his fake checks. Mom." She reached across and tore hers open, waving the paper like a prop. "See, just for show," Calder chuckled, proud of himself. The sound of it made something inside me fold in half. I touched the envelope but didn't open it. The paper felt warm from his hand. I smiled, small and quiet. "Thank you," I said, and slipped it into my purse. For a moment, his eyes flickered surprise, maybe confusion. Then Ivy laughed again, and the moment vanished. The night ended the way family dinners sometimes do, when love turns polite. Too many smiles, too many dishes, and a silence that follows you out the door. When I got home, I placed my purse on the counter and stared at it, half expecting the envelope to whisper an explanation. I didn't open it. I just went to bed with that brittle laughter still echoing in my head. The next morning, I was pouring coffee when the phone rang. The caller ID showed the local branch of my bank. "Mrs. Ward," the woman said, cheerful and professional. "Your deposit from yesterday has cleared successfully." I set the cup down. "Deposit, yes." "Ma'am, the cashier's check from Calder Ward." My hand trembled. The envelope hadn't been a joke. It had been real and deliberate, and whatever my son meant by it, it was only the beginning. The river moved slow that morning, like it was thinking things over. From my kitchen window, I watched the cargo boats drift past the docks, their horns echoing against the brick buildings downtown. I sat at the table with my tea, hands wrapped around the cup, trying to warm the place the phone call had left cold. The envelope still lay on the counter. I hadn't opened it. I didn't need to. The woman at the bank had said it clearly enough. Cashier's check from Calder Ward. Cashier's check. The phrase sounded heavy, official, impossible to confuse with one of his jokes. I sipped the tea, though it had gone bitter. The quiet was too deep, so I turned on the radio, only to turn it off again when the first carol started playing. I tried to picture Calder writing that check, his hand steady, the way his father's had been when balancing bills late at night. But Calder had never been patient with numbers, or with me. After his father died, he was 14, too old to cry, too young to understand the shape grief takes in a home. I took extra tutoring shifts, taught night classes at the community college. Literature paid little, but words saved me when nothing else could. I told him stories about endurance, about decency. He listened then. I don't know when he stopped. A knock startled me. "Morning, Selene," came a familiar voice. I opened the door to find Moraine Holt, holding a pie wrapped in a towel. She lived 2 houses down, widowed like me, the kind of woman who brought comfort without needing to talk about it. Still baking for the whole street. "I see," I said. "It keeps me from saying what I really think." She smiled. Stepping inside, "You look like you didn't sleep." "Didn't." I gestured toward the table. Tea's still warm. We sat, and for a moment, the only sound was the tick of the wall clock. She looked at the envelope. From Calder, I nodded. Her eyes softened. "He's not asking for money again, is he?" "No, he gave it." "Gave." She blinked. "Now, that's a headline." I told her about the dinner, the laughter, the fake check joke, the call from the bank. She listened without interrupting, just tracing a finger along the edge of the napkin between us. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "That's not a prank, Selene. That's something else. Testing you, maybe. That's what I'm afraid of," I said quietly. Moraine tilted her head. "You going to call him?" "Not yet. You should at least open it. I don't want to see the number." "Then it's not about the money." "It never was," I murmured. We sat together in the stillness that only old friends understand. Finally, she rose, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You did right. Keeping your voice steady. People remember tone more than words." After she left, I carried the pie to the counter, next to the envelope. The 2 things looked strange together. One baked from kindness, one written from pride. Outside, the river kept moving. The sunlight broke across its surface, bright but deceptive, like calm over current. I thought of Calder's laugh, how it used to sound like real joy before it started to sound like defense. I set my teacup down carefully, afraid to make the slightest noise. Somewhere between a mother's patience and a grown son's pride, respect had gone missing, and I wasn't sure who had stopped looking for it first. The first call came just after noon. I was folding laundry when the phone rang sharp, insistent, like it already carried blame. "Mrs. Ward." Ivy's voice snapped through the line before I could answer properly. "What exactly did you do?" I held the receiver a little away from my ear. "I'm sorry. The bank just called. They said the checks Calder and I deposited were stopped. Both of them. The teller said yours went through." I blinked at the floor. "Stopped? I don't understand." "I didn't. Don't play innocent." She cut in. "Did you talk to him? Did you call the bank yourself?" "No, Ivy. I deposited it like anyone would. That's all." There was a rustle on her end paper. Movement? Frustration. Unbelievable. He does these things. And you always take his side. "I haven't spoken to Calder since dinner." "Well, something's wrong," she hissed. "The bank said cashier's check." "Do you even realize what that means?" "I do," I said quietly. "It means it's real." Silence. Then a sharp exhale. "Then he's humiliating us." Me," she corrected, her voice trembling. "You enjoy this, don't you? Being the sainted mother while the rest of us look foolish. I don't enjoy any of this." "Sure you don't." The line went dead. I stood there, phone still pressed against my ear, the hum of disconnection louder than it should have been. I set it down, tried to keep breathing evenly. The kettle on the stove began to whistle, shrill and sudden. I poured hot water over a tea bag I didn't want, just to have something to do with my hands. The second call came 10 minutes later. "Mom!" Calder's voice tight, clipped, rehearsed. "I just got off the phone with Ivy. What happened with that check?" I took a breath. "You tell me. Don't start." He said, "The bank said yours cleared. Ours didn't." Did you tell them something? I deposited it at the branch on East Bay Street. Nothing more. You didn't ask for verification. No. Did you tell them to rush it, Calder? I tried to keep my tone even. It was a cashier's check. It cleared because it was real. He went quiet, then laughed short. Bitter. Real. Right. Ivy said yours were stopped. I stopped them, he snapped, and then caught himself. It was just supposed to be a joke. A joke I was making a point. Mom. About trust. About family. What point does stopping a check make? You wouldn't understand, he said quickly. It's complicated. Business things. I let the silence settle between us until he had to fill it. Ivy's overreacting. He said finally, just don't talk to her right now. I'll handle it. You already have. His voice hardened. Don't turn this into a moral lesson. I don't have to. I said, you're doing that yourself. He exhaled sharply. I don't need this right now. Before I could respond, the line clicked, leaving nothing but the faint buzz of an empty connection. I set the phone back in its cradle. My hand was trembling. The teacup on the table had gone cold again. I stared at the steamless surface, seeing the reflection of my own face older, smaller than it felt yesterday. This wasn't about money. It hadn't been for a long time. Whatever Calder was running from, it wasn't me. It was something he'd built himself into a man who mistook control for love and silence for safety. The phone stayed quiet after that, but the sound of it still hung in the air, waiting. I spent most of that afternoon pretending to read while the phone sat silent beside me, heavy as a thought unfinished. The check, the calls, the accusations, they had all opened a door I'd been keeping closed for years. Calder and Ivy had built their lives out of the kind of confidence that photographs well. When he first started his renovation company, he posted every project online with glossy captions about legacy and vision. Ivy followed with her own feed charity luncheons, wine tastings, the occasional quote about gratitude placed neatly between designer handbags. Their smiles looked effortless, but I'd seen how hard they worked to keep the light pointed in their direction. Once, a year ago, Daniel Kerr, our family lawyer, had called me after a routine estate meeting. Selene, he'd said, voice steady and professional. I think your son may be overextended. He's borrowing against invoices that haven't been paid. I remember gripping the phone tighter. You mean he's in debt, Daniel replied. He's trying to look solvent. That's not the same thing. I didn't tell Calder I knew. I told myself it wasn't my place, that he needed to make his own mistakes. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't bear to watch him fall and not reach out. Later that week, I'd mentioned it to Moraine as we pruned the camellias by her porch. She was wearing her gardening gloves, the kind that made her hands look smaller, but her words carried weight. Selene, she said, clipping a stem cleanly. Some messes are like mud. If you try to help someone out of it, they'll pull you in too. I'd smiled at her then. That polite sort of smile you give when advice feels like judgment, even if you know it's true. Now, sitting by the window with the light thinning across the river, I could hear her voice again, sharper than the scissors she used on those flowers. The phone rang once more, Moraine this time. Not Calder. I answered before the second ring. Heard from him yet? She asked. Twice yesterday. I said, once through Ivy, once through guilt. You sound tired. I am. She hesitated. You want the truth, always. You keep thinking you can love him back into being honest. I let out a small laugh that wasn't funny. That's what mothers are supposed to do. No, she said. Mothers teach honesty by living it. Sons decide if they'll follow. That's on them. Her words settled like dust. Quiet, but impossible to ignore. I can't stand by if he's drowning, I said softly. Then throw him a rope. Selene, don't jump in. I closed my eyes. remembering Calder at 12, standing on a fishing dock, refusing to wear his life jacket because he thought it made him look weak. His father had laughed and said, "Let him try the water once. He'll learn." He had slipped, panicked, sputtered, and then learned some lessons you never forget, unless pride gets in the way. When I opened my eyes, the room had dimmed. I could see my reflection faintly in the glass, blurred and doubled. Like two women, one who wanted to save her son, and another who finally understood the cost. "I'll think about what you said," I told Moraine. "Good," she replied. "Thinking is free. Rescuing isn't." After we hung up, I looked toward the counter where the envelope still rested, the edges beginning to curl. I wondered if Calder had written it to measure my loyalty, or if it was his way of reaching out from a place he couldn't admit was falling apart. Either way, the numbers on that check were no longer the point. What mattered was how many chances a person should get before love starts to sound like permission. That night, the house felt too still, as if even the walls were waiting for an answer. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope between my hands. The flap was soft from being opened and closed too many times. Inside, the check looked ordinary white paper, black ink. My name written in Calder's steady handwriting. The date in the top corner read December 24th, Christmas Eve. I traced the letters of my name with my thumb. His signature was deliberate, the kind he used when he wanted to prove something. When Calder was little, he used to make birthday cards out of notebook paper and tape. I still have one somewhere in a shoebox. To the best mom in the universe. The universe was misspelled, but he drew stars all around it to make up for it. Back then, he gave me things that cost time, not money. Somewhere along the way, that changed. I folded the check again and placed it back in the envelope, then tucked it into the top drawer of the sideboard next to old letters, my wedding ring, and a photograph of his father sanding a cradle he never got to use. The drawer had become a museum of intentions, things meant to last, but never did. The phone stayed silent. I had half expected another call, maybe a half-hearted apology or an explanation disguised as business. But nothing came. Around 8, I poured myself a small glass of sherry and sat in the armchair by the window. The river glowed under the moonlight, calm and opaque. It reminded me of Calder's voice when he lied, smooth, convincing, impossible to read beneath the surface. I told myself I wasn't angry. Anger was noisy, temporary. This was quieter, heavier, like carrying a secret you didn't ask for. Still, I needed to know why the bank had treated that check differently. It wasn't curiosity. It was self-defense. By morning, I had made up my mind. I put on my navy coat, the one with the mended pocket, and took the envelope with me. The lobby of the bank smelled faintly of citrus and disinfectant. The line moved slow. I waited behind a man counting bills and a woman arguing about overdraft fees. When it was my turn, I stepped forward, holding the envelope like a confession. "Good morning," I said. "I'd like to ask about a deposit I made 2 days ago." The teller, a young man with kind eyes, smiled politely. "Do you have the receipt?" "Ma'am?" "Yes." I handed it to him. It cleared faster than I expected. I was told it was a cashier's check. He typed something on his computer. "That's correct. Mrs. Ward." Cashier's checks are issued against the bank's own funds, so they're guaranteed. It was processed immediately. Can you see who issued it? He squinted at the screen. It came from the account of Ward and Stone Renovations. The remitter name listed is your son, Calder Ward. I nodded slowly. And the other checks, I'm afraid I can't discuss other accounts. Of course. He lowered his voice slightly, as if he could sense the story underneath. You have nothing to worry about. The funds are verified and secure. I thanked him and walked out into the wind. Outside, the air smelled faintly of rain. I held the envelope tighter as I crossed the street toward the river. A cashier's check meant intention. It wasn't casual. Wasn't something you wrote for show. Calder had wanted this one to be real. The question was, why mine? I turned toward home, my hands cold despite the gloves. The envelope pressed against my palm, heavier now that I understood what it was worth. It wasn't money he'd given me. It was a message I hadn't yet learned how to read. The following morning, I went back to the bank. I had slept little, my thoughts looping through fragments of Calder's voice, Ivy's laughter, and the faint echo of the word deposit. The same teller from yesterday was busy, so a woman at the desk waved me forward. Her nameplate read, Mr. L. McAdams, the kind of name you expect to find in an old novel, though the man himself looked no older than 40, his suit pressed but not proud. Mrs. Ward, he said, standing politely. Please, have a seat. I understand you had questions about a recent deposit. Yes. I placed the envelope on his desk. I was told it cleared unusually fast. I'd like to understand why. He adjusted his glasses, glancing at the paperwork. Yes, I see the record here. This was a cashier's check drawn on certified funds. That means the bank guaranteed payment before it was issued. It's as good as cash. So it wasn't processed from my son's account. Technically, no. The funds were secured first and then printed in your name. It would have required deliberate action, not an automatic issue. Deliberate. The word stuck like a burr. He continued, the others well. I probably shouldn't discuss private accounts, but I can tell you they weren't the same type. Personal checks, most likely. I folded my hands together on my lap. Were they stopped? Mr. McAdams hesitated. Professional instinct meeting human decency. I can confirm that 2 checks issued from the same source had stop payment orders placed the following morning. The timing appears intentional. He looked up then, studying my face as though searching for offense. I'm sorry. Mrs. Ward, I assume this situation involves family. I can assure you there's no mistake on our end. None at all, I murmured. It's exactly what he meant it to be. Mr. McAdams cleared his throat gently. If it helps. Cashier's checks are often used when someone wants to make a statement of reliability. Perhaps your son wanted to show that he could still be trusted. I finished. He smiled faintly. That's one interpretation. I thanked him and gathered the envelope, though my hands felt heavier than when I'd walked in. As I rose, he added, for what it's worth, Mrs. Ward, I've seen families use money to say things they can't find words for. Not always kindly, but rarely without meaning. Outside, the day had turned damp, the air thick with that strange warmth Savannah gets before rain. I walked slowly toward the corner. The envelope clutched against my chest. A test. That was all it could be. He'd written 1 check real, 2 as theater. He wanted to see who would cash it, who would laugh, who would flinch. I thought about the years of covering for him late bills, exaggerated stories, the small lies he told to make failure sound like timing. I'd called it love then, but love had started to look a lot like permission. A gust of wind caught the corner of the envelope, and for a moment I almost let it go, but I didn't. I held it tighter, walking past the iron benches and the parked cars until the bank was a blur behind me. By the time I reached the riverfront, my legs ached. I leaned against the railing, staring at the brown water moving slow beneath the bridge. He hadn't wanted to give me money. He'd wanted to measure my faith like I was still the mother who could be tested, who would always pass. The tide kept pulling steady, neither kind nor cruel. I stayed until the air turned colder, until I could breathe without shaking. Then I folded the envelope once more, slipped it into my bag, and headed home to figure out what lesson my son thought he was teaching. Moraine called the next morning. her voice steady as always. "I made soup," she said, "and too much of it. Come eat before it turns into glue." I hesitated, staring at the folded envelope on my counter. "I'm not much for company today." "That's exactly why you're coming," she replied. Her house smelled of rosemary and onions. She wore her old denim apron, the one with the faded strawberry patch stitched near the hem. I took a seat at the table while she ladled soup into 2 bowls. "Looks like the world's still spinning," she said, sliding mine across. "You just look like you're waiting for it to stop." I managed a smile. "You ever feel like people test your patience just to see if you still have any left?" She gave me a long, knowing look. Called her again. I nodded. He gave me a cashier's check. Said it was a gift, then stopped the others he wrote for himself and Ivy. Moraine let out a low whistle. "That's a new flavor of drama." It was deliberate. I said quietly. He wanted to see who would cash it. The banker told me the timing wasn't an accident. She stirred her soup, lips pressed thin. "He's trying to prove something, either that you still trust him, or that he still controls you." I felt the words land. "He's my son." "I know. That's the hard part." We ate in silence for a while. The clink of the spoons was the only sound. Finally, she said, "You remember my daughter, Elise?" I nodded. I'd only met her twice, both times at a distance. The way polite people keep their distance from unfinished stories. She hasn't spoken to me in 6 years. Moraine said, "Last thing she told me was that I ruined her ambition by being poor." Can you imagine that I shook my head? She wanted me to sell the house, this one. She gestured around, said the money would set her free. I said no. So she left. Freedom's funny. Selene, some people think it's something you buy. Her voice cracked then. Just once. Small but real. They don't respect what they didn't have to earn, and they resent the ones who remind them of it. I swallowed hard. "You think Calder resents me?" "I think he's scared," she said, "of being seen for what he is before he's ready to fix it." I looked down at the table, tracing the faint scratches in the wood. I keep wondering what I should do. Call him? Confront him? No. Her tone was firm. "Right. Don't talk. Not yet." Talking gives him space to twist it. Writing makes you face what's yours. Writing letters, notes, whatever works. My counselor used to call it emptying the drawer before it jams. I smiled faintly. "You and your metaphors. They kept me sane," she said. "You don't get to control what he learns. Selene, but you can decide how much of your peace you spend trying." When I left her house, she pressed a small notebook into my hands. The cover was plain brown, edges soft from use. For when the talking feels too loud, she said, "At home." I sat by the window and opened it. The first blank page stared back, quiet and expectant. I wrote slowly at first, just his name, Calder, and then the rest came like water, finding its own path. "You are still my son, but I can't protect you from the lessons you keep creating." The pen left a faint groove in the paper. I closed the notebook and set it beside the envelope. The two looked strangely alike, unfinished sentences, waiting for someone to read them the right way. The room felt still again, but not empty this time. My silence had shape now, a pulse, a voice of its own. By the time Calder's car pulled into my driveway, the light outside had turned the color of weak tea. I hadn't expected him, not that he ever warned me before showing up. His footsteps came quick up the porch, then the sound of a sharp knock. I opened the door halfway. "You could have called." He gave a breathless smile, the kind people use when they're trying to seem fine. "Thought it'd be easier to talk in person." I stepped aside. "Then talk." He walked in, glancing around the room as if checking what had changed. Nothing had. I'd kept it the same for years, clean, quiet. A place that didn't ask for approval. Calder didn't sit. He paced once, twice. Hands in his pockets. About the checks. He began. That was a misunderstanding. I folded my arms. A misunderstanding that required stop payment orders. He flinched. It wasn't what it looked like. Ivy overreacted. You know how she is. Ivy didn't write them. You did. His jaw tightened. I was testing something well, not testing exactly. I wanted to see who'd take it seriously. You mean who'd believe you? He looked up at me, startled by the accuracy. Mom, you always twist things. No, I said evenly. You twist them. I just hold the ends straight. He exhaled, restless, then dropped onto the edge of the couch. Everything's been a mess lately. The company, the loans, the clients who don't pay on time. I've been juggling things, trying to keep the image up. You know how this town is. Once people smell weakness, they scatter. Then maybe it's time to stop performing strength. He rubbed a hand over his face. You think it's that easy? You've never run a business. No, I said. I raised a boy who thought every problem could be solved by pretending it wasn't there. That hit him. His eyes flicked toward the window. Anywhere but me. I'm just asking for understanding, he said finally. The check was supposed to be symbolic. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You came to explain, I said softly, not to apologize. His shoulders stiffened. You're reading too much into it. Then what do I read? Calder, you hand me a real check. Stop yours and Ivy's and call it symbolism. That's not a gesture, it's a message. He stood. I'm trying to fix things. All right, you don't have to turn every mistake into a sermon. I'm not preaching, see, I'm listening. You just don't like the sound of what you're saying. He glared, the old teenager surfacing behind the man. You think you're better than us because you live quiet and small. You don't get how things work now. I get that pretending to have more than you do is its own kind of poverty. That stopped him. For a heartbeat. I saw something in his face, fear. Maybe shame, but it disappeared as fast as it came. He moved toward the door. Forget it. I shouldn't have come. I didn't follow him. Calder, I said, voice low but steady. Whatever you're hiding, it's already showing. He froze, his back to me. Then he shook his head. You always think you see everything. I used to, I said. He left without another word, the door closing harder than it needed to. The sound echoed through the house long after his car disappeared down the street. When the quiet returned, I sat at the table and opened the brown notebook. On the next blank page, I wrote what I couldn't say aloud. He's afraid. Not of losing money, but of being seen without it. The ink smudged under my thumb, dark as the truth still waiting behind his eyes. The envelope came on a Thursday, cream-colored, with a familiar letterhead Kerr and Associates. Savannah. I knew Daniel Kerr's handwriting before I even opened it. For a moment, I thought it might be something ordinary, an update about my pension fund, or the estate review he still handled out of loyalty. But the weight of it told a different story. I set it on the kitchen table beside my cup of tea. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that listens. I took a slow breath, slid my finger under the flap, and pulled out 3 neatly folded pages. Dear Mrs. Ward, I hope this letter finds you well. I wish I were writing under different circumstances. I read the first lines twice before the words began to settle. Calder's company, Ward and Stone Renovations, was being audited by a private accounting firm after multiple subcontractors filed civil claims for unpaid work. The letter listed dates, invoices, and 2 pending lawsuits totaling nearly $200,000. My throat went dry. Further down, Daniel's tone shifted from professional to personal. I need to inform you that your name appears on at least 1 loan application from 18 months ago. If you did not co-sign this loan, you may need to file an affidavit to protect yourself from liability. I stared at the page until the words blurred. The letter slipped from my hands. Landing softly on the table, I sat back, the world suddenly tilting on a strange axis. He had forged me. I pressed my palms flat against the wood to keep them from shaking. A sound escaped me half-breath, half-disbelief. After a moment, I reached for the phone and dialed the number printed at the top of the letter. Daniel answered on the third ring. "Selene," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "I hoped you'd call. I just read your letter." My voice was steady, though it shouldn't have been. "Tell me exactly what's going on." He sighed. "I wanted to prepare you before the auditors contact anyone directly." Calder's firm took out a series of short-term bridge loans to cover project delays. One of those loans lists you as a guarantor. Your signature appears on the documents. It isn't mine. I assumed as much. The handwriting, well, it's close but not exact. I swallowed. So he copied it. "I can't say that legally," Daniel said carefully. "But you'll need to protect yourself. If the lenders pursue repayment, they may come after assets under your name. My house, potentially. Yes. Unless we act quickly." The room spun a little. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. "Daniel," I said softly, "I want the truth, not the legal version. How bad is it?" He hesitated. "Bad enough that he's desperate. When people start falsifying co-signatures, it means they've run out of collateral." I gripped the receiver tighter. "He's my son. I know," he said gently, "but he's also liable. And if you don't step back, you could be too." Silence stretched between us. I could hear the faint tapping of his pen, the hum of his office heater. "Finally," he said, "Selene, you have a good heart, but this isn't about loyalty anymore. It's about survival." I thanked him and hung up. The click of the receiver sounded final, like the closing of a door I hadn't realized was open. For a long while, I just sat there. The letter lay on the table, pages fanned like wings that refused to lift. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping lightly against the window. When I finally stood, my knees gave way for a second, and I caught the edge of the counter to steady myself. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger would have required space, and I had none left. I picked up the letter again, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the drawer beside Calder's check. The two papers lay there together, the promise and the betrayal, side by side. Somewhere inside me, a decision began to form. Small and unsteady, but growing roots. He had written my name without permission. The next time he saw it, it would be at the bottom of something real. The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the air heavy and clean. I walked down to the riverfront, the same path Calder and I used to take when he was small. Back then, he would run ahead, chasing the gulls and shouting for me to watch him. Now, the only sound was the water pressing against the rocks. Slow and certain. The tide was coming in. It always did. You couldn't stop it, couldn't bargain with it. It reminded me of truth, the way it creeps closer, no matter how long you try to ignore it. My shoes made soft sounds on the wet pavement as I replayed Daniel's words in my head. "He forged your name." I thought of Calder's voice when he was younger, proud and bright. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of everything." That promise had turned into something else. A sentence I couldn't unhear. I sat on a bench facing the water. The river moved like memory, beautiful, but heavy with what it carried. When I went home, the house felt smaller. I left the lights off. In the kitchen, the drawer with the envelope and the letter from Daniel waited for me, patient as guilt. I took them both out and laid them on the table. The air smelled faintly of rain and lemon polish. I sat down, opened my notebook, and began to write. Calder. There are things I never told you because I thought protection was love. I see now it was fear. I feared losing you more than I feared losing myself. But when you used my name, You made a choice that took both. I am not angry. I am done being afraid. I stopped, breathing through the tremor in my hand. You can fix this if you want to. You can confess, repair, rebuild, but I won't shield you from what you've built. Love should not make accomplices out of mothers. I signed my name Selene Ward the way he had once written it for me. Only this time, it was real. Next, I took a sheet of stationery from the drawer and wrote a second letter. This one to Daniel. Daniel, please file the affidavit. I will not be listed as a guarantor for Calder Ward or Ward and Stone renovations. Prepare whatever documents you need to clear my liability. I will sign them in person tomorrow. It felt strange. That word clear. As if doing the right thing still needed permission. When I finished, I placed both letters side by side on the table. The one to Calder trembled slightly from the damp ink. The one to Daniel stayed flat, unbothered, practical. I poured myself a glass of water, sipped once, and turned off the kitchen light. In the dim glow from the street lamp, the papers gleamed pale against the wood. I thought of all the times I had stepped between Calder and consequence, the unpaid fines, the late payments, the soft excuses made in his name. Each one had felt small at the time, a patch over a crack. But now the cracks had become walls. I stood there until my legs ached. Finally, I whispered it out loud, to the empty room, to the echo that used to hold laughter. I won't save him this time. The tide would come whether I wanted it or not. All I could do was stop pretending I could hold it back. I left the letters where they were, side by side like two versions of the same truth, one written in love, the other in consequence. Then I turned off the last light and let the dark take its rightful place. 3 days passed before I heard from him again. The letter came without a return address, but I knew the handwriting immediately. Calder's neat, deliberate script. The same one that had once copied mine. Inside was a single card. Dinner. Saturday, 7 o'clock. Just you. No apology. No explanation. I read it twice. Then laid it beside the 2 letters I'd written days earlier, one for him, one for Daniel. The ink on mine had long since dried. That afternoon, I walked to Moraine's to return the pie dish she'd lent me. She was pruning her roses, wearing her wide straw hat, her pruning shears clicking like punctuation. Got something in the mail, I said, holding up the card. She read it, her brow furrowing. Dinner. Huh. And just you. That sounds like a stage waiting for a performance. He's setting it, I said. And you're planning to walk right onto it. I nodded. Some lessons need witnesses. She sighed, setting her shears down. You've got more courage than patience. I hope that balance doesn't cost you peace. Maybe peace isn't the point anymore. She looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, then wear something that reminds him you don't need his approval. I smiled at that. Faint, but real. When Saturday came, I spent the morning cleaning, not because the house needed it, but because my hands needed purpose. I polished the small silver locket Calder had given me when he was 8. Inside, a photograph him with a missing tooth. Me laughing. The clasp was worn but still held. As evening neared, I chose a simple gray dress and my mother's pearl earrings. Not fancy, not somber, something honest. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman older, thinner, but finally certain. At 6:30, I called Daniel. He asked me to dinner, I said. He paused. Do you think it's about the company? It's always about the company. Selene, you don't owe him any more explanations. If he wants to discuss finances, tell him to contact me. I will, I promised. Though we both knew I wouldn't. After we hung up, I stood by the window watching the sun lower behind the river. The light turned everything gold for a moment, quiet, forgiving. I tucked my letters into my purse, the one addressed to him on top. not as ammunition, but as truth. At 6:50, I stepped outside. The air was soft, heavy with magnolia. My car started on the first try. For a second, I thought about turning back. Then I remembered all the years I had done exactly that, choosing silence over confrontation, love over honesty. This time, I kept driving. When I reached his neighborhood, the streetlights were already glowing. His house looked smaller than before, though nothing had changed but the way I saw it. A single light burned in the dining room window. I parked by the curb and sat for a moment, watching the curtain shift slightly, as if someone had been checking to see if I'd come. I could almost hear his voice in my head, practiced charm, layered over nerves. "You came, Mom." I turned off the engine, grabbed my purse, and stepped into the quiet. The walk from the car to the front door felt longer than it was. My shoes clicked softly against the brick path. When I reached the porch, I hesitated only once before knocking. From inside came the faint sound of a chair scraping, then footsteps. Slow and deliberate, the door opened. Calder stood there, hair neatly combed, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He was trying to hide. "Mom," he said, "you came." "I always do." I answered, and I stepped inside, ready to hear what kind of lesson my son thought he was teaching this time, and what kind I might finally teach him in return. The door opened before I could knock twice. Calder stood there in a pressed shirt and that same uneasy smile I had seen since he was a boy, caught doing something wrong. "Come in," he said quickly. His voice was calm, but his hand trembled as he stepped aside. The house was quiet, too quiet. The smell of dinner hung in the air, but there was no music, no laughter. The table was set for two, only two. Ivy was nowhere in sight. "Where's Ivy?" I asked. He hesitated. "Staying with her sister for a few days. We thought it would be best." I nodded, taking the chair he pulled out. He poured wine into 2 glasses, spilling a few drops that darkened the tablecloth. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "I did," he replied, sitting across from me. "I wanted it to be quiet, no distractions." I noticed the edges of paper sticking out from beneath a magazine on the counter, white envelopes, thick ones, stamped with red letters. I didn't need to read the words to know what they were. He followed my eyes, then looked away. "I meant to clean that up." "Don't," I said softly. "I'd rather see the truth." For a moment, we just listened to the clock ticking from the hallway. He picked up his glass, then set it down again without drinking. "You still think I'm cruel?" he said, voice low. "No," I answered. "I think you're scared." His throat worked as if he wanted to speak, but couldn't. Then, quietly, he said, "You have no idea how hard I've tried to keep everything standing. I know what trying looks like." I said, "It's what mothers do." He looked up sharply. "I didn't forge your name to hurt you." There it was, the confession, thinly veiled as justification. I didn't flinch. "You did it because you thought I'd protect you again." He exhaled, shoulders sagging. It was one form, one signature. I told myself I'd fix it before anyone noticed. Then the payments fell behind, and the lies just kept growing. "And the laughter at dinner?" I asked. "The fake checks." He pressed his palms together. "That was anger. I was tired of being the failure you pitied. I never pitied you. Calder, I worried for you. There's a difference." He stared at the tablecloth, twisting a fold between his fingers. "I thought if I could control how you saw me, I could control how I felt about myself." "That's not control," I said. "That's fear in a suit." His laugh came broken. "You make it sound simple. It isn't simple. It's honest." He looked at me then. Really looked. His eyes red around the edges. "You stopped calling last month." I noticed. I didn't know what to say anymore. "I thought you'd given up on me." I held his gaze. "I stopped saving you." That's not the same thing. He covered his face with both hands, elbows on the table. For a moment, the sound of his breathing filled the room, the kind of quiet crying men do when they've run out of justifications. When he finally looked up again, he said, "I don't know how to fix this. You start by telling the truth. To the people you owe, to the ones you hurt, to yourself." He nodded slowly, as if the weight of that truth had been sitting on his chest for years. The wine between us went untouched. The food had gone cold. "Mom," he said, his voice barely audible, "I didn't invite you here to apologize. Boom. I needed to know if you'd still come. I came," I said quietly, "because you're still my son." "But that doesn't mean you get to stay a child." The clock struck 7. Outside, the last bit of sunlight slipped off the windows, leaving us in the faint glow of the dining room lamp. He looked smaller in that light, not weak, just human, and for the first time in a long while, he stopped pretending to be anything else. We sat in that quiet too long, the kind that makes truth press against your ribs. Calder's eyes stayed fixed on the table as though the grain in the wood could offer him an escape route. The clock in the hall ticked loud enough to mark every second of our silence. "Finally," he said, "you deserve to know the rest." My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "I already do." "No," he whispered. "You know the surface, not the reason." He stood, paced once around the table, then stopped behind his chair, gripping it like it was keeping him upright. "When the business started falling apart," he said, "I kept thinking one more project would fix everything. Just one. But the banks," he exhaled, shaking his head, "they started pulling credit. I couldn't get a new line, Mathieu. I told myself it was temporary. Then a client backed out of a renovation halfway through, and the whole thing unraveled. Payroll, insurance, suppliers, everything depended on money I didn't have." He looked at me then, eyes rimmed red. "I told myself I was buying time. So, when the bridge loan came up, I used your name. I didn't speak." The words landed like stones in a well deep, echoing, impossible to pull back. He went on. "It was one form, just one. I scanned your old signature from the house deed you sent me last year. I told myself I'd pay it off before you ever found out. But then the audit started. And the numbers didn't match, and I couldn't stop it." My hand went to my chest, though the ache wasn't physical. "You forged my name. I didn't mean to steal from you," he said quickly. "I meant to borrow your credibility. I thought I could fix everything before it mattered. You thought lying wouldn't matter." He flinched. "It wasn't like that. I needed to know I wasn't alone. And you chose my name instead of my honesty." His mouth trembled. "I thought if you knew how bad it was, you'd see me as a failure." I wanted to speak, but the words tangled behind my teeth. I had taught him to be brave, to take responsibility, to look truth in the eye even when it burned. Somewhere, that lesson had gone missing. He sank into the chair again, head bowed. "The check at Christmas, it wasn't supposed to hurt you. I needed to see who still believed in me. I thought if one person cashed it, I'd know I wasn't finished yet." I stared at him, my chest hollow. "You could have just asked, Calder." He looked up, startled by the softness of my voice. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't angry. I was grieving. "I would have believed in you," I said. "I always did, even when you gave me no reason to." His eyes filled, and he wiped at them with the heel of his hand like a boy trying not to cry. I didn't know how to ask anymore. Every time I called, you sounded tired. Every time I lied, it got easier, until it didn't. I said. He nodded, until it didn't. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It pulsed, raw and heavy, like a wound refusing to close. "I never meant for you to get dragged into this," he said finally. "You've been through enough. I thought I could carry it myself. And how's that working out?" He gave a small, broken laugh. "You don't need to twist the knife. Mom, I'm not twisting anything. I'm just holding the truth where you can see it. He looked down again, voice cracking. I'll fix it. I'll talk to the bank. To the lawyers. I'll take responsibility. You should have done that before you used my name, I know. You didn't just sign a paper, I said quietly. You signed away my trust. And I don't know how to get that back. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. His shoulders shook once, then stilled. I'm sorry, he whispered. I swear, I didn't do it out of greed. I just wanted to be someone you could be proud of again. I was always proud of you, I said, but pride without honesty isn't love, it's denial. He raised his head, eyes swollen. What happens now, I don't know, I said truthfully. Maybe this is where you learn what being a man actually costs. He swallowed hard. Nodding, the room felt smaller, stripped bare of everything except two people who had run out of pretending. I stood, pushing my chair back slowly. The sound scraped across the floor like an ending. I'm not going to protect you from this, I said. You need to face what you've done. He didn't argue. He just nodded again. Quietly, like someone surrendering to gravity. When I reached the door, he spoke once more, voice thin but sincere. You still believe in me at all? I turned slightly, enough for him to see my face. Belief isn't the problem anymore. Calder, trust is. And with that, I left him sitting in front of that empty table, the wine untouched. The truth finally poured. I didn't go to sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the check and Daniel's letter side by side, their edges aligned like a before and after. By dawn, I knew what had to be said. The next afternoon, Calder called. His voice was quiet, hesitant. Can I come by? Yes. I said, come alone. He arrived just before noon, wearing the same shirt from the night before, sleeves rolled and collar wrinkled. He didn't look like the man who used to boast about deals or clients. He looked smaller, like he'd been living inside his own apology. We sat across from each other at the table. I had already brewed tea, but left his cup untouched. I talked to Daniel. I began. His eyes flicked up. You called him, I did. I told him to prepare the documents to remove my name from anything tied to your company. From now on, everything between us business, money, image will be separate. He nodded slowly, his fingers tapping the rim of the table. That's fair. I'm not finished. I said, if you want my respect again, you'll have to earn it like everyone else. He frowned, a small shadow of pride flickering back to life. You think I haven't paid enough already? I think you've paid everyone except yourself, I said. You keep buying redemption with new lies. That's over. He leaned back, the chair creaking. What do you want me to do? I took a breath. 3 things. He crossed his arms, waiting. First, I said, you'll repay your debts lawfully, every cent you owe. You face it head on, no shortcuts, no forged signatures, no hiding behind my name or anyone else's. He swallowed, but didn't speak. Second, I continued, you'll attend counseling. Not for me, for you. You need to understand why every time you fall, you drag someone else down with you. His brow furrowed. Therapy. I'm not. Yes, I cut in. You are. Because this isn't just about money. It's about how you confuse approval with love. He looked down at his hands. And the third, you stop using the Ward name like it's a brand. I said, it's a family. Calder. You either honor it or you stop using it altogether. No more press pieces. No more charity galas where you play the generous son. I won't let my silence advertise your ego. He let out a long breath, shoulders slumping. For once, he didn't argue. I'll talk to Daniel next week, I went on. He'll oversee the restructuring. If there's anything worth saving in that company, it'll be done legally and transparently. He nodded. staring at the floor. I understand. You don't have to agree with me. I said, you just have to follow through. He looked up then, eyes glassy but defiant. You really think counseling and paperwork will fix me? No, I said softly, but they'll stop you from breaking anyone else. His face tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might stand, shout, or storm out. Instead, he dropped his gaze again and rubbed his temple. I don't know if I can do all that. Then you're not ready to be the man you keep pretending to be, I said, and I won't pretend with you anymore. The silence that followed was long and fragile. He nodded once, a small, tired gesture. All right, he murmured. I'll start with Daniel, and I'll call someone about the counseling. That's a beginning, I said. He managed a weak smile, one corner of his mouth trembling. You're tougher than you used to be. No, I said. I'm just done mistaking love for rescue. When he left, he paused at the doorway, hand resting on the frame. His voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry I turned your name into something it wasn't. I met his eyes, then turned it back. He nodded and stepped into the daylight. The door closed gently this time, like he finally understood the difference between leaving and running away. He came early, just after sunrise. I was still in my robe, the kettle barely beginning to hiss, when I heard the knock. This time, it was soft, 2 taps, hesitant. When I opened the door, Calder stood there holding a manila envelope. His eyes were swollen from a night without rest. I didn't mean to wake you, he said. You didn't. I lied. He stepped inside, glancing around as though the house might have changed overnight. It hadn't. I gestured to the table. Sit. If you need to. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he placed the envelope in front of me. Careful, like he was setting down something fragile. I met with Daniel last night, he said. He stayed late for me. I slid the envelope closer, but didn't open it yet. What is it? The transfer papers, he said quietly. You're listed as interim trustee for Ward and Stone until I finish clearing the debts. You'll have full oversight bank access, contracts, the works. My fingers brushed the edge of the envelope. That's a lot of trust to hand back. He nodded, his jaw tightening. You'll keep it safe. I know you will. I studied him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something quieter recognition. Maybe. He looked like a man who had finally stopped arguing with gravity. You're sure this is what you want? I asked. It's not what I want, he said. It's what's right. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The morning light touched the table between us, thin and clean, like something being washed away. Finally, I broke the seal and skimmed the first page. Daniel's handwriting confirmed what Calder had said, a temporary transfer of authority. Binding, witnessed, lawful. No shortcuts this time. You understand, I said. This doesn't erase what happened. I know, it just means we're handling what's left. He nodded. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Mom, just structure. I looked at him, then not the businessman, not the liar, not even the son I used to defend, but the man trying, awkwardly, to rebuild from the rubble of his own choices. There's a difference, I said quietly, between protecting and enabling. I should have known that sooner, he gave a faint smile. You thought love meant rescue. It used to, I admitted. Now I think love is stewardship, keeping what's worth saving, even if it isn't easy. He leaned back in the chair, his shoulders finally lowering. I don't deserve that. No one does. I said, that's what makes it real. We sat like that for a while, saying nothing. The kettle began to whistle softly on the stove. I rose to turn it off. And when I looked back, he was standing. I'll check in with Daniel tomorrow, he said. We'll make it official. Good. He hesitated, then reached for my hand, a small, uncertain gesture. I let him take it. His grip was steady, not desperate, for the first time in years. It felt like trust, not manipulation. When he left, the air in the house stayed still, almost peaceful. I looked down at the signed papers, the ink still fresh, and realized something had shifted. Love wasn't the same as surrender. It was the quiet act of holding on without holding back. It had been 3 quiet weeks. The house no longer felt heavy. It simply felt lived in. Most mornings, I spent an hour in the garden, tending the herbs that had outlasted everything else: basil, thyme, a stubborn sprig of rosemary that refused to quit. That morning, the air was soft and smelled faintly of mint. I was trimming the lavender when the mail carrier stopped by the gate. He handed me a small envelope, cream-colored and familiar in its careful handwriting. Calder's. I wiped my hands on my apron before taking it. The envelope was sealed, no return address, just my name written in the same neat strokes I had once found on a forged signature. I carried it to the porch, sat down, and broke the seal. Mom, thank you for believing when I didn't deserve it. Daniel says the paperwork is finalized. The debts are almost cleared. I've started counseling first session last Tuesday. It was harder than I thought, but I didn't lie, not once. That felt new. I know you said love isn't rescue. I think I'm finally beginning to understand that I just wanted you to know I'm learning. Calder. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and brought it inside. My journal waited on the kitchen table. The same brown one Moraine had given me weeks ago. Inside, pressed between the pages, was the old check, his first lie, and his first truth in the same piece of paper. I slipped the letter beside it. The 2 edges touched, soft against each other, and I closed the cover gently. Outside, a car door shut. A familiar voice called. You hiding from the world again? I smiled. Only the noisy part of it. Moraine walked up the path, carrying a tin of lemon cookies. You've been quiet lately. That's either peace or plotting. Peace, I said. I think. She set the tin down and poured tea from the pot I'd already warmed. He wrote, I nodded. A short letter. No excuses this time. That's something, she said. It is. We sat for a while, listening to the rustle of the wind through the leaves. I used to think forgiveness meant pretending nothing happened. I said, now I think it just means being able to breathe again. Moraine smiled. Breathing's a good start. She reached across the table, touched my wrist lightly. You did what mothers are supposed to do. You taught him how to face himself. I looked toward the garden. The rosemary had started to flower, small pale blooms against the green. He's still learning. So are you, she said. I laughed softly. Maybe we both are. We sat there until the tea cooled, neither of us needing to fill the silence. The afternoon light shifted across the yard, slow and forgiving. When she left, I stayed a little longer, the journal open beside me, the faint smell of lavender in the air. Peace, I thought, wasn't forgetting. It was simply knowing the storm had passed and choosing not to call it back. The year passed quietly, not by forgetting, but by learning how to hold what remained without bitterness. On my 72nd birthday, I set the table for dinner 3 places, arranged with the same care I once used for 5. Moraine arrived first, bringing her lemon cookies, still warm from the oven. Daniel came a few minutes later, coat folded neatly over his arm, carrying a small bouquet of garden lilies. You didn't have to bring flowers, I said. Consider it interest, he replied with that dry humor lawyers use when they're trying to sound human. We sat around the table. The roast was modest, the wine open, the light low. One seat at the end remained empty, the napkin folded squarely on the plate. I had placed a small card there earlier that read, For lessons learned. Moraine noticed it first. You still keep the extra seat I do. I said, It keeps the room honest. Daniel nodded quietly. He wrote to me last month. He said, Sent the final payment receipts. Every cent repaid. My hands stayed still on the tablecloth. He told me, too. Just one line. It's done. That was all. Sometimes that's all it needs to be, Moraine said softly. I smiled, faint but genuine. I think he's finally learning that silence can mean respect, not distance. We ate slowly, conversation light but warm gardens. Small-town gossip. Moraine's latest crusade to save the local library from budget cuts. I listened more than I spoke, letting the sound of ordinary life fill the spaces that used to echo with worry. When the plates were cleared, Daniel poured us each a small glass of wine. He raised his in a quiet toast. To endings that aren't bitter, he said, to beginnings that take their time. Moraine added, I lifted mine last, to decency. I said, It may arrive late, but it's worth waiting for. We clinked glasses. After they left, the house settled into its gentle rhythm, the clock ticking, the wind brushing the curtains, the river murmuring beyond the glass. I gathered the dishes, then paused by the empty seat. The folded napkin looked almost ceremonial, a small act of remembrance for the parts of love that hurt before they healed. I carried my glass to the window and stood there for a long moment. The river shimmered under the evening light, calm and endless, the same way it had looked the day everything changed. On the sill rested the brown journal. I opened it to the last page, where Calder's letter was tucked beside the old check. I read it once more, not to relive it, but to remind myself that even flawed words can carry truth. Thank you for believing when I didn't deserve it. I closed the journal and set it down. The air smelled faintly of rosemary from the garden, that stubborn herb that never stopped growing no matter what the season demanded. I thought of Calder, not as the man who forged my name, nor the boy who made mistakes too big for his age, but as the son who had finally learned what belief costs when it's taken for granted. Outside, a barge drifted down the river, its light gliding over the water like a memory finally at peace. I watched until it disappeared, feeling no ache this time, only gratitude that the story had found its balance. I turned back to the table. The chair at the end remained empty, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt earned. Respect, I realized, doesn't expire with age. It only deepens for those who decide to earn it. The house was still. I blew out the last candle, its thin smoke curling into the dark. Sometimes the cruelest joke is the one that teaches love how to grow up.